Good morning, dear students. So, today we discuss midbrain, that is the part of the brain stem. So, usually the brain stem consists three parts, that is midbrain, pons, and medulla. So, these three portions are called as midbrain portion. So, usually the cerebrum and cerebellum that connected to this brain stem. So, midbrain that connected to the cerebrum superiorly and also the cerebellum to all these three parts with cerebellar peduncles. So this brainstem is very important portion which will be connects the cerebrum and cerebellum. So now we'll come to the first one, the midbrain. What it is? So it is connecting part. It connects the midbrain, that is to the a portion of connecting with the forebrain and to the hindbrain. So usually that is the portions in between the fore and hindbrain. So approximate length is about 2.5 centimeters, and the important structure in the internally, there is a cavity, that is a communication canal that called as cerebral aqueduct. So we remember important canal, the cavity which will be connects the third ventricle with the fourth ventricle, that is the canal cavity is called as cerebral aqueduct. And again the another important, the tectum portion, that is the posterior to the aqueduct, that posterior part is called as tectum, and also it is made up of right and left superior and inferior colliculi. The right and left side, superior and inferior colliculi, there are four colliculi, two superior and two inferior, or you can take it right to left to, like that. That is the portion. So usually the portion to the aqueduct is called as a tectum, and that is made up of colliculi, that is right and left, superior and inferior. So the superior colliculus is connected in the lateral geniculate body by the superior brachium. So be important centers in this region. The superior colliculus is connected to the lateral geniculate body by the superior brachium. So it is one of the reflex centers in related to the movements of eyeball and head response to the visual. So it is an important reflex center that movements of eyeball and head in response to visual. That means anybody comes and not at the door. So immediately what happens, your eye are moving towards the door side, who is the person. So that is the reflex center in related to the movement of the eyeball and head region. Then what about the inferior colliculus? So these are connected to the medial geniculate body by an inferior brachium. So the inferior colliculus is connected to the medial geniculate body by the inferior brachium. So it is in one of the reflex centers, that is movements of head and neck response to auditory stimuli. That means, so anybody is not at the door. So what happens? Your head and neck is turning towards the knotting portion. That means who knotted. So immediately your head and neck is turning to that one. So that is the reflex center for the hearing. that means for the sound. So that is why response to the auditory stimuli. So we remember these colliculi, superior and inferior. Superior colliculus is reflex center for the movement of eyeball and head, and the inferior colliculus is response to the movement of head and neck in related to the response to the auditory stimuli. That is the point you have to be remembered. Then again, each half of the midbrain that anterior to the aqueduct is called the cerebral peduncle. The each half of the midbrain anterior to the aqueduct is called as cerebral peduncle. So each cerebral peduncle is subdivided into crus cerebri anteriorly and substantia nigra in the middle and tegmentum posteriorly. So we remember of these three important parts, that is anterior to the aqueduct is called that cerebral peduncle. So each peduncle is subdivided into the crus cerebri anteriorly and substantia nigra in the middle portion and the tegmentum posteriorly. That is the three portions. Apart from that, the internal there is other nuclei. So what are that other nuclei? Number one is substantia nigra, that is an important nucleus. Then red nucleus and the nucleus for the third oculomotor nerve, that is mainly in response to the movements of the eyeball, changes the pupil and the lens size, that is third oculomotor nucleus, and fourth cranial nerve nucleus, that is trochlear nerve, that is movement of the eyeball, and that is the two particularly third and fourth cranial nerve nucleuses are located in the midbrain. So be important the four nuclei, the substantia nigra, red nucleus, and nucleus of third cranial nerve and nucleus of fourth cranial nerve nucleus. So here particularly the two important reflex centers, the movement of the eyeball and also the changes of the pupil size and also a lens size. Then also the trochlear nerve that mainly related to the eyeball movement. So this is about the midbrain portions, very short and brief concept, just you have to be remember. Then coming to the next part, that is a pons, pons varolia. So this pons is particularly a bridge that is connecting the midbrain with the medulla, that is the middle portion in between the midbrain superior and medulla inferior. So that is why it is usually called as a bridge which will be connecting the midbrain and the medulla. So the length is about 2.5 centimeters and it is having a two surfaces, ventral and dorsal. It has a two surfaces, ventral and dorsal. And again laterally the middle cerebellar peduncles connected with the cerebellum. So that will be the laterally the middle cerebellar peduncles connected with the cerebellum. So that connecting fibers is usually called as peduncles, the group of fibers which are connected from the pons to the cerebellum, that is in the middle portions. So superior cerebellar peduncles are connected the cerebellum to the midbrain, and then the ventral surface is almost convex in the median plane, a longitudinal sulcus which lodges the basilar artery. So the ventral surface, it is almost convex and in the median plane a longitudinal sulcus is present. So this usually sulcus is lodges the basilar artery. It is one of the important artery which is supplying to the brain. So we remember the ventral surface is convex and in the median plane a longitudinal sulcus that lodges the basilar artery. Then the dorsal surface that is posterior. So usually that dorsal surface is hidden by the cerebellum. That means it is covered, hidden by the cerebellum and form the upper half of the fourth ventricle portion. So usually the dorsal surface is hidden by the cerebellum and form the upper half of the fourth ventricle. That means upper part. The upper part of the surface is passed as a floor of the fourth ventricle. So usually this transmits the sensory and motor tracts, the group of the nerve fibers, that is sensory and motor tracts, which are transmits particularly in the pons region. So now we'll come to the internal features. The internal features, the ventral part is basilar part that consists longitudinal and transverse fibers. So usually the ventral part is known as basilar part. So this part is consist the longitudinal and transverse fibers. That means the group of nerve fibers. So usually these fibers are usually called as, or you can just be remembered, corticospinal, corticonuclear and corticopontine and pontocerebellar. So these are the nerve group of nerve fibers. They are called as the group of nerve fibers, and that is particularly corticospinal. That means from the cortex to the spinal cord. Then corticonuclear, that is from cortex to the nucleus, and cortex to the pontine, and pontine to the pons to the cerebellum. So like that the group of the fibers is in the ventral part. And also there is nuclei, that is pontine nuclei present in that of the region. So next in the dorsal part, that is known as tegmental part. So in the dorsal part known as a tegmental part, that consisting many group of nerve fibers, that is called as tracts. So these tracts ascending and descending. Ascending means they ascend upwards from the lower part of the brain structure, and as well as from the spinal cord they going up is called as ascending tracts. The fibers which are coming from the brain to the lower part, to the medulla and to the spinal cord, that is descending tract, especially in the spinal cord connections, the group of nerve fiber. So just to be remembered, ventral part is a basilar part and dorsal part is tegmental part, that is nothing but a group of nerve fibers in that of the region. Then another important centers. So here the nuclei of four cranial nerves, that is usually the nucleus, which will be presented in the this region, in the pons region, the four cranial nerve nucleuses. What are the four cranial nerve nucleuses? Number one, the trigeminal nerve. So that trigeminal nerve and abducent, that is sixth nerve, then facial, seventh nerve, and eighth vestibulocochlear nerve. So these four cranial nerve nucleuses present in the pons region internally. Number one, the fifth one, trigeminal nerve, that is mainly helps for chewing, sensation of face and the head region. Then sixth one, abducent nerve, that is mainly related to the regulation of eyeball movement. Then facial nerve, that is seventh one, the taste, salivation and facial expression. And eighth one, vestibulocochlear nerve, that mainly maintains the equilibrium, that is the portion. So these are the four cranial nerve nucleuses present in the pons region. Apart from these four, the sum of the other nuclei, that is pneumotoxic and aponestic areas. So pneumotoxic and aponestic area So these are the other nucleuses, and particularly these nucleuses are controls the respiration. So you may call it as respiratory center, that is the pneumotaxic and aponestic area. So just you have to be remembered. So this is the portion of all the portions, that is the midbrain portion, and this is the pons, and this is the medulla portion, medulla oblongata. So here these two usually is called as cerebral peduncle, which connects the cerebrum, and this portion is the pons. So that is the terminal. This is the middle portion is usually this convex part, and here there is a sulcus that is lodges the basilar artery. That is the important. Then coming to this medulla portion. So this is usually the anterior view of medulla oblongata and pons. Anterior view, that will be the portions of medulla and pons region. So then coming to the blood supply, mainly it is supplied by the pontine branches of basilar artery. So usually the basilar artery branches, they are called as pontine branches. So these pontine branches which supplies to the this area. So usually see the pontine hemorrhage. So any hemorrhage or any the portion should be pathological conditions that may leads the contralateral hemiplegia, because it's mainly consisting the group of nerve fibers. So usually that will be any hemorrhage in this region that may leads to the hemiplegia contralateral, that is to be hemiplegia portions. Then coming to the last one is medulla oblongata. So the medulla oblongata, it is the lowest part of the brain stem. So it is lowest part of the brain stem is called as medulla oblongata. So this extending from the lower border of the pons to the plane just above the first cervical vertebra. So this extending from the lower border of the pons to the plane just above the first cervical vertebra. That means up to the foramina magnum portions. That is an opening in the occipital bone, foramina magnum. So usually the cervical nerve, the first, and where it is continuous with the spinal cord. So usually the continuation, this medulla will be continued as a further spinal cord from the foramina magnum level, and usually lies in the anterior part of the posterior cranial fossa. So this will be lies in the posterior cranial fossa and extending down to the foramina magnum, that is opening in the occipital bone. Through that the continuation and becomes as a spinal cord. So we remember that is the lowest part of the brain stem that extends from the lower border of the pons to the plane just above the first cervical nerve and first cervical vertebra. You can make it where it is continuous with the spinal cord. So lies in the anterior part of the posterior cranial fossa extending down to the foramina magnum. Then coming to the divisions, it is divided into two parts. One is lower closed part with the cranial part contains the central canal, and upper half portion, that is the open part where the central canal opens to form the floor of the fourth ventricle. So what will happen here? So the upper portion is open portion, that is mainly forms as a the floor of the fourth ventricle, and lower half portion is closed part with that particularly continue or contains as a central canal. That central canal is continuation as a canal in the spinal cord. So that is the important feature in that of the region. So just to be here, so this is the portion posterior aspect. So this will be portions of cerebellar peduncles connected, the group of nerve fibers, and here this is the median sulcus. So these are the stemnia medullaris. So this is cunate tubercle and gracile tubercle, like the nucleus portion. So now the external features. So it has the two halls, right and left one, and anterior and posterior median fissures. So right and left two halls portions and anterior and posterior median fissures. So each half, that is right and left portions, further divided into anterior, lateral and posterior regions. So each half portion is divided into three portions: anterior, lateral and posterior regions by the anterolateral and posterolateral sulci. So the shape is piriform. The length is about 3 centimeters, width is 2 centimeters, the thickness is 1.25 centimeters. So usually this consists the ascending and descending tracts. So what this ascending and descending tracts? So that is nothing but group of nerve fibers which are going up and coming down from the spinal cord to the brain, that is ascending, and brain to spinal cord, that is descending tracts, that is group of nerve fibers. They are called as ascending and descending tracts. Then again ventral, that means anterior aspect. So usually there is a elevation, the longitudinal elevation, that is called as pyramids. So this is consisting the largest motor tracts, that means motor group of fibers, that is usually called as corticospinal fibers. Corticospinal fiber, that is from cortex to the spinal cord. So this is a group of nerve fibers. So usually these are motor tracts, that is in the portion of pyramid. So here many fibers of the right and left pyramids crosses in the midline. That means they have crossed from one side to the opposite side, say right side to left side and left to right side, the largest motor tracts. So many fibers they will be connecting right side and left side, so crossing. So this called as pyramidal decussation. The pyramidal decussation means the crossing fibers from one side to opposite side. So usually again some fibers are run transversely across the upper part of the pyramid, upper portions of the pyramid, the fibers are crosses. So these are usually called as anterior external arcuate fibers, that is the fibral structures. Then in the lateral aspect, there is one of the important nucleus, that is oval elevation, called as oliva. It is a basal nuclei or a gray mass, that is mass of gray matter, and that called inferior olivary nucleus, that is known as inferior olivary nucleus, which will be present in the lateral aspect. So here rootlets of hypoglossal nerve, particularly here the rootlets of hypoglossal nerve emerges between the pyramid and the olivary nucleus, that is oliva. So that is the point. Then simultaneously the rootlets of the ninth and 10th nerves and of the cranial part of the accessory nerve emerging behind the oliva. The ninth and 10th cranial nerves and the cranial part of the accessory nerve, they are emerging behind the oliva. Then in the dorsal aspect, that is in the posteriorly, so usually it is marked by a V-shaped depression. So V-shaped depression, it is the lower part of the fourth ventricle, lower half. You can take it as a lower half of the floor of the fourth ventricle. So here there is a three elevations, that is from medial to laterally. These are nothing but again group of nucleuses. So that is Number 1, fasciculus gracilis, that is nucleus, expanded to form the gracillae tubercle that consists the gracilis nucleus right side and left side. Then again fasciculus cuneatus, it is also a nucleus that expands to form the cunate tubercle that consists the cunate nucleus right and left one. Then inferior cerebellar peduncle connects. That inferior cerebellar peduncle means the fibers which are connecting from the cerebellum to the medulla. So that is called as inferior cerebellar peduncle, that is in the dorsal aspect. Then again be important the sum of the cranial nerve nucleus, that is the last four. Usually the eighth, that is vestibulocochlear nerve, that is the hearing part, that only that hearing portion. Then the glossopharyngeal cranial nerve, then vagus cranial nerve, accessory cranial nerve, and hypoglossal cranial nerve. So these four, that is 9, 10, 11, 12, four cranial nerve nucleuses, and the part of the eighth cranial nerve, that is the hearing part, will be located up in this region, important, the cranial nerve nucleus is in the medulla. So usually that vestibulocochlear nerve hearing part, then glossopharyngeal is mainly related to the swallowing, salivation and taste. Then vagus nerve, that is the thoracic and abdominal organs is related distribution. Accessory nerve, that is the cranial part, and hypoglossal mainly related to the tongue. So these four cranial nerve nucleus is present here. So, and another important point in the medulla region, so don't forget it and be concentrate here. So the vital reflex centers, the vital reflex centers means the important centers, they are very vital, that means the important centers like cardiac center that regulates the heartbeat and force of contraction, then medullary rhythmicity that adjusts the basic rhythm of breathing, vasomotor regulates the diameter of the blood vessels, and other non-vital centers like coordinate, sneezing, swallowing, hiccup, vomiting and cupping. So vital centers, non-vital centers. The vital centers particularly be remembered cardiac center, medullary rhythmicity, vasomotor, and non-vital coordinate, sneezing, swallow, hiccup, vomiting and cupping. So especially vital be remembered cardiac center controlling of the heart and controlling of the respiratory system, that is medullary rhythmicity. So very important simultaneously the vasomotor, the dilatation of the blood vessels controlling. So these important centers in this region. So the internal features, that is as already known, the gracilar tubercle and cunate tubercle, that is nothing but the nucleuses, then hypoglossal nucleus, then dorsal nucleuses of the vagus nerve, then solitary nucleus, then spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, then nucleus ambiguous and inferior salivary nucleus, vestibular nucleus, pyramidal decussation, sensory decussation. So these are the important centers be remembered. Then the blood supply is usually supplied by anterior spinal artery, that is a branch of vertebral artery, and posterior inferior cerebellar artery, anterior spinal artery and posterior inferior cerebellar artery. So this is the point in related to the medulla oblongata. I hope you are up to the make of this region. Then the next I will make it that what is the pyramid, what it consists, what is that. So in remaining portions has some of the important points. So I will explaining to the next classes, or you can go for extra day. That is another important portion. I hope you are clear